Warning, this show contains adult language and themes. Liberals and little children should cover their ears.
Welcome to Liberty Never Sleeps, where negativity never sounded so good. Now here's your host, Thomas Purcell.
And welcome to Liberty Never Sleeps. I'm your host, Tom Purcell. If you'd like to reach me during the show, you can tweet me at LotusTom or email me at tom@libertyneversleeps.com. Or you can always reach me on Facebook through Liberty Never Sleeps at facebook.com. Joining me today is Laz once again. How you doing, Laz?
I'm doing good, T. How you doing?
Well, I'm doing really good, and you know why?
Why?
Because our website is aflame with people reading about the true story of ISIS. Let me bring you up to speed on this.
Alrighty, please do.
Yesterday, with all the developments in Iraq and everybody deciding how and what they were going to do, I put a lot of thought into what was going on in the Mideast, over in Syria and Iraq and Iran, and why the United States was talking with Iran. And I was thinking. I got out my copy of The Seven Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence, because I thought it probably would bring me insight into what was going on, and it did quite a bit. I sat down, and the image of Lawrence's flag and colors was bouncing around my head because there's some plates in the book that, show you him in riding into battle and stuff.
Okay.
And I said, that flag looks awfully familiar. And I said, it's just Arabic letters. And then I thought about it, and I said, wait a minute, that flag is very familiar. And I looked up the flag of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and it was essentially the same flag. It was a bastardized version of the 1920 Arab flag that was flown by Lawrence. Back then, there was a flag that he used. Eventually, it became the Arab flag with the triangle and the three stripes.
Okay.
But back then, at the time that he was fighting against the Turks and the Ottomans, they used what looks like the Al-Qaeda flag, only was green. And now they're flying almost the same flag in black. And I said, well, why is that? Mm-hmm. Is that just something that, and it says, and the letters say something along the lines like Muhammad is the true God, and that sort of thing. Anyway, that's beside the point. So I started doing some research on what exactly was going on in the Mideast. And here's a little background on this. I want to back up the clock a little bit to 1916. And this is World War I going on in Europe and in most of the world. And they sent a young Corporal T.E. Lawrence, who eventually became Lawrence of Arabia, to meet with the Arabs and discuss with them the possibility that they would help the British Army against the Ottoman Empire and against the Turks.
Wait a minute, they sent a corporal?
He was an expert on Arab studies. He was well known. He was basically a junior officer in an intelligence department.
Okay.
And they said, listen, we've got guys there. We've got a colonel. I forget what his name was. It was depicted in the movie Lawrence of Arabia, which is kind of a bastardized version of what actually happened.
Right. They
sent him there to because the British could not, needed the Arabs, and they said maybe this guy will do it for us. So Lawrence goes there, meets with the Arabs, and essentially hammers out an agreement after spending some time with them. He says, look, the British are not here to establish the British Empire in the Middle East. If you help fight the Ottomans and drive them from this land and drive the Turkish Empire and break up the Ottoman Empire, we'll establish an Arabian homeland, or basically a nation of Arabia, in what is now known as Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, that whole Syrian plateau.
Okay.
Mostly desert.
Mm-hmm.
And so they agreed to this. And they fought at the side of the British as a light cavalry unit all the way to Damascus. As a matter of fact, they got to Damascus first before the British Army did, took it, and they hung the Arab flag above Damascus. That was the story in Lawrence of Arabia.
Right.
What people don't know, and was only small mentioned, is at the time Lawrence was doing this, the British and the French, in collusion with the Russians, who were fighting the Ottomans, sat down to an agreement. They knew they were going to win the war and said to each other, look, at the end of World War I, when this is all dust is all settled, so to speak, we're going to establish British and French and Russian protectorates in the Middle East and carve up that land and run it out of Britain as another colony of Britain or another colony of France.
So they did colonize it, even
now,
though they sent Lawrence in to say that
right.
they weren't.
There's a debate about how much Lawrence knew.
Right.
To this day. It's not, a lot of the Arabs don't like Lawrence because they felt he knew he was part of the problem.
Right.
A lot of people revere Lawrence. Some people say that he was backstabbed. In all likelihood, he probably didn't know the details, but knew kind of what they were planning. He organizes the Arabs. At the end of the war, they start, the BS. We're going to draw the lines here. And they established the national borders and nation of Syria, Iraq, Iran, Jordan. That's the long and the short of it. Mm-hmm. And basically left the Arabs out in the cold. The compromise was drafted in the League of Nations, where these were protectorates, but they would be independent nations friendly to the West, and we get to pick the leaders. Al-Faisal was one of them. And that was a compromise that Lawrence wasn't happy with. He died a broken man. I mean, he died in a traffic accident, but by all accounts, he was not happy with the solution. As a matter of fact, there's a documentary on BBC that's available on YouTube called The Legacy of Lawrence, and you should look it up.
Okay.
And the Arabs, the random tribes and the Bedouin tribes and all the people that fought with Lawrence were left out in the cold. So the kingdoms run on for some years. A man by the name of Saddam Hussein runs one of the puppet dictatorships out of the land known as Iraq.
Right.
And has control. Years go by, and you will know the story. Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. We destroy his military. Goes by now, and Bush the Younger comes along and runs Saddam Hussein out. There's no government in Iraq at this time. The American army is occupying it.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, the Arab tribes felt that they were entitled to the land. There's no leader there. We have a right. And what Bush did is establish a guy by the name of al-Maliki,
right,
as the leader of Iraq in a fair election, supposedly. And his job was to bring the tribes together and establish a nation. What happened was Maliki did not listen to tribes, did not establish an independent Arab homeland for these tribes, and forced the tribes out of any kind of power in Iraq and began friendly relationships with Iran. The reason is because Maliki is a Shia Muslim, like the Iranians, and is pro-Shia.
Gotcha.
Okay? So now the Arabs, sensing they're going to get fucked again,
right,
said, we want our land back, and this time started to fight for it, and blood was shed. They moved against Syria. They moved against now Iraq. They'll probably move against Jordan next, if that's my guess. They moved as far as Baghdad, as far as they could grabbed a lot of money and loot, which is what they did under Lawrence.
Right.
And probably will move against Jordan next. That's my guess. If I was looking at a military map and I was a general, I'd be preparing for an assault in Jordan.
So basically, they're going after lands that was promised them
to them by Lawrence
almost 100 years ago.
Now, I don't approve of the violence.
The brutality.
Brutality is beyond belief. But this is the nature of Bedouin tribes and other tribal peoples. But this is why Iran and the United States are making strange bedfellows, and why they're talking. Because if you validate the claims of ISIS and the peoples that are fighting under the ISIS flag, then you illegitimize the governments of Iran, of
Jordan,
and Syria. Right. So you're between a rock and a hard place. No pun intended.
No, you're right.
And now they're faced with that. The best thing for the United States to do is pull out completely and try and broker an agreement between all these people. I don't know if it can be done at this point, because blood's been shed, and these are tribal leaders, and once blood's been shed, you got to fight them to the last man.
Yeah,
that's just the nature of these cultures.
Yeah, but would they even entertain the idea of letting the United States broker any type of agreement?
I don't know. That's for diplomats and people smarter than me. But I can tell you, this mantra of it's a terrorist army and they're looking to seek another 9/11, that's not true. Whether that becomes the eventual outcome of it is another matter. But that's not their goal. Their goal is to reestablish a free Arabian kingdom as originally intended. These are the grandchildren of Lawrence and the tribes of fought under him. And Lawrence predicted this. If you read the Seven Pillars of Wisdom, the end of the book, when he's in negotiations, he tells the story with the League of Nations. He said the best thing is to let these people become free in an independent nation on their own. Let the Arabs make the decisions for themselves. And we're not, and that's not what's happening.
Well, you know, and that obviously that's the wisdom that he's talking just makes perfect sense. But of course, the colonial countries' greed for power and oil.
That's exactly right.
Exactly right. That trumped it.
Exactly right. They want to make sure that they have governments friendly to them and will sell them oil cheap. And that's what it's all about. And it's unfortunate, because if the Arabs had developed a free nation in post-World War I, we might not be having the discussion about terrorism today. And we probably would be still getting well and dealing with them if we had allowed them to be Arabs and have their own land.
Right.
And it's just a shocking development. It's what's being told in the mass media is basically an extension of the political argument we have here in the United States, and that's not what it's all about. It's not about Bush's phall-ups. It's not about Obama's phall-ups, although both presidents screwed up big time.
Right.
It's about a free Arab nation, and it's about this Sykes-Picot Treaty that was done behind Lawrence's back, and the injustice that may have been done to these Arab tribes who fought along and agreed to this.
Right.
And they feel that they've been betrayed by the West.
Well, sure, they were double-crossed.
They
were lied to. They were misled. Right. They were double-crossed.
They don't see any difference between the Western nations of Great Britain and France and the United States. To them, it's all the same. They're all a bunch of corrupt politicians that want to exploit the Mideast for its resources and not let the Arabs run the Arab Arabia for themselves. And I got to tell you, they got a good case. Once I've read all this stuff. Now, I'm not siding. I don't want people to mistake or misunderstand my words. I'm not siding with them against the United States, and I'm not saying that these atrocities were deserved. But I got to tell you, they have
their motivation.
Their motivation, I understand. Right. I understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. I don't agree with the methods. I think if you could just get all the Arabs down in a common place and they could devote something to this ideal of a free nation, of a free Arabia, you might solve the problem. And in turn, you might solve the problem for the Jews. I don't know. There's such hostility, and there's been so much blood split. I don't know if there's a resolution to this in our lifetimes.
Well, yeah, the dissension and the hatred and the resentment go for centuries between all these tribes and countries. And then, of course, the colonial state countries just made it worse.
You've got 100 years of bad blood. That's why the Russians are siding with Syria. That's why we're in negotiations with Iran over ISIS.
Right.
And it's probably the Saudis feel probably the same way, because all of these kingdoms were all set up in the post-World War I Ottoman Empire with this Sykes-Picot Agreement.
Right.
And whatever negotiations that went on. I don't know all the details. Went on with Neville Chamberlain, and I mean, if there was one guy who caused more problems in this world, it was Neville Chamberlain. Chamberlain was a major part of the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the negotiations after, and he's also the guy that supposedly was going to have peace in our time with Adolf Hitler. And we're now living with this hassle and this nightmare scenario of the Middle East on fire.
Right, literally.
When I watched films, if you go on Twitter and you look up Sykes-Picot over, which is a hashtag, you will see pages of a lot of these fundamentalists and the videos that they've taken and the stuff that they've done. They're the same army, really, essentially, and the same tactics that were under Lawrence. They're a light cavalry unit. They've replaced the camels and horses with Toyotas, but it's the same thing. And now we're faced with having to fight these guys, and it's really not necessary. If you could just get everybody to calm down and agree to some sort of brokered agreement.
Well, easier said than done, obviously.
I know. I think George Bush discovered this when they tried to negotiate a settlement in Iraq after Saddam Hussein and just basically abandoned the area as a mess and said, let them handle it.
Right.
And the problem was Iraq, Malachi, the leader, went to Obama about a year and a half ago or so and said, hey, listen, the northern provinces are a big problem. We're going to need some help. And basically Obama told him to go pound sand.
No pun intended,
No
Tom.
pun intended. And that's where we're at. I mean, that's
well, of course, Obama.
and everybody's trying to say, well, they're trying to politicize something that really should not be politicized and should be discussed in a rational manner about the history of the area. You know what amazes me? I'm just a political analyst sitting here doing my job, trying to tell the truth. Don't they have intelligence analysts in Langley that explained this onto the National Defense Team of the United States and said, look, this is what's going on here actually. This is where we need to go with this. Instead, we got guys deciding whether or not we're going to bomb somebody.
Right.
And it's such a narrow and limited viewpoint of American foreign policy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's more to it than just political analysts. There's a whole lot of money involved, Tom.
I know, but gee whiz, how much money do we spend fighting these wars? How much money are we going to spend? How much is this going to cost us? You know?
Right.
Certainly there could have been an arrangement where everybody could have profited from it. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia and some of the cities there. Riyadh Airport is one of the busiest now in the world. These cities look like the cities of tomorrow in Tomorrowland. Right. In Disneyland, they're that beautiful.
Yep.
Surely, these kind of prosperity can be brought to all these peoples by allowing them to operate freely. Isn't what Liberty Never Sleeps say all the time is that the goal to prosperity and the goal to freedom are free markets.
Right.
And an independent people, a self-governed people with small government. And here we are again discussing a major worldwide issue, and it's really the fault of quote-unquote big government getting in the way. Guys sitting around a table deciding what's best for somebody else.
Right. Well, like you said, we're exploiting their resources. Okay, and that's not just us. Okay, obviously, other countries involved. And then, but the oil companies are complicit in this too. The oil companies are influencing these decisions.
Of course they are. Instead of letting people and operate in an open and free market, it's the same old story. We know what's best.
Right.
Government knows best. We know you can't be trusted with your resources. It's the same argument that this administration says to the American people when it says you can't build a refinery here, but you can do this, but you have to build solar power, but you can't farm cattle in this way. Yeah. It's government telling people what to do with their own property. And we've got to all sit down and put this aside because, I mean, if you look at history, big government has been literally the death of tens of millions of people. And it's going to happen again here in the Middle East, and it's going to end up in World War III because these guys in Iran, they're going to get that nuclear weapon. The longer we putz around with this, and by gun, they're going to use it. You know they're going to use it.
Sure, why wouldn't
they? They're going to use it to blackmail these people. Got to remember, the people that are marching under the black flag of ISIS, these are not high technology or professionally trained troops. They're not going to be able to stand up against the modern army built to fight World War III. But they're going to cause a lot of death and a lot of damage in the meantime. And they're not going to give up. They're a tribal culture that are going to fight to the last man if they have to, much like the Japanese did.
Right.
And it's just going to end badly for everybody, for the Arabs, for the Americans, for the French, the Europe, and the Russians, unless you could all sit down. And this is where Obama could be a world leader and come out to the world and say, this is what's going on. We invite the Russians and the British and the French and the Arabs to sit down at a table, maybe in Iceland or Switzerland, and decide once and for all where the lines in the sand are to be drawn. But he's not doing that.
Well, he's totally inept at being a world leader.
You know, Putin met with the Saudis shortly before all this broke out. If we don't do it, you know that the Russians probably will make a move in this area, because the war in Syria is not letting up. There's no peace. The cities are destroyed. So this is an opportunity for the United States to once again show why it's the greatest nation in the world. And Obama, in some sort of hysterical left-wing agenda, doesn't want to have anything to do with it and say it's someone else's problem, it's their country's problem.
Well, this is coming from the president who apologized for the United States.
Yeah.
Of course. He's not he's incapable. That's not his agenda, has nothing to do with his world policy. That's not it. All he's doing, he's concentrating on his agenda for the United States. He wants us to be big government. He wants us to be a socialist country, and nothing can convince me of other than that.
Well, he just believes that the solution
is big government.
Well, if this big government is the solution, though, is basically let's walk away from the world and spend that money on the inner cities. And it's a very narrow, limited intellectual. This is what happens when we put C students in the White House. I mean, that's really what it is. These guys, I would be willing to bet that if you sat down with Barack Obama or George Bush, they would not be able to understand the story I just told you. They'd never heard of it before. I'm willing to bet that no analyst ever presented this to them and it provided them a serious discussion about it, or if they did, it was largely ignored and as unimportant because it happened 100 years ago. I'm just saying.
I got you. I mean, I could believe that of Bush. I don't know that I believe that of Obama, but I think Obama, it's like I say, it's not on his agenda. And like I said, he was indoctrinated into a Marxist socialist lifestyle, and that's where he is, and that's what he thinks, and all he wants to do is control our resources in the United States. Like you say, go to the inner city, rebuild, and just let the world do what they want to do, as if it's going to have no effect on us in the future.
He doesn't.
As if there's nothing bad can happen from that.
Well, see, the problem is that our current president, Obama, his understanding of foreign policy is who not to bomb and when to bomb. And that is absolutely the worst ideology you can have. And it's the way I would say a less educated person views foreign policy. A more sophisticated understanding of foreign policy knows that when you get to the point where you're trying to decide who to bomb or whether or not to bomb, at that point your foreign policy has failed.
Right.
Foreign policy, it needs to be a sophisticated and subtle endeavor in which you're constantly in talks with the rest of the world. And our military is not to be used in that manner. It's meant to be a deterrent, to prevent violence and to prevent. In other words, they won't attack this country because we know we've got a base there and we have overwhelming force. That's the reason you do it. It's so that you don't have to use it.
Right.
But his understanding of the U.S. military and its purpose is completely shallow, because I think he has little or no training in it. He was unqualified for the job.
Obvious he's not qualified for the job as a world leader.
And our national defense team were picked from political opportunists rather than people who were qualified for the job.
Right. Well, I think that he wants to weaken this country on all fronts.
Well, that's true. I mean, but again, we get back to this original topic. Is he trying to weaken the country, or in his view, make a country a better country? So we could go round and round this, but we're out of time for this segment.
Like fundamentally change
the
United States.
We're out of time for this segment. We got to go to commercial break.
All right.